If you have trouble finding this episode in your collection or online, you might need to search for it under its alternate title, Foregone Conclusion. This is a review of the Star Trek Voyager episode 1159. If you have not seen this episode and you don't want to know whether or not Captain Janeway's ancestors get together, be warned. Spoilers beyond this point. I relate to Captain Janeway a lot more in this episode than I would ever have thought possible, because she becomes disillusioned when she learns the truth about one of her ancestors, and I've had that experience too. One of my great-grandfathers was in the Klan. And Janeway finds out one of her great-grandmothers, 15 generations back, wasn't as involved in a notable construction project as she thought. So, yeah, same thing. As the episode begins, Neelix has randomly acquired an interest in historical landmarks on Earth. He accosts Captain Janeway in the corridor and verbally assaults her with the measurements of the Great Wall of China. Janeway counterpunches by saying, "Oh yeah? Well, let me tell you all about the Millennium Gate. It was a self-contained ecosystem 1 kilometer in height that helped humanity prepare for building its first Martian colonies. And guess what? My ancestor, Shannon O'Donnell, was the driving force behind getting it built. She was also one of the first woman astronauts, and she hit 70 home runs that year. And the governor of Indiana personally begged her on his hands and knees to help build the Millennium Gate. And she said, 'Only if you fly me in on a private plane.' And he said yes, and then that's what happened." Dissolved to the actual Shannon O'Donnell, late December, the year 2000, entering the small and charmingly named town of Portage Creek, Indiana, though I do believe the original French settlers pronounced it Portage. Future site of the Millennium Gate, so say the signs. Shannon's not aboard a private plane, but behind the wheel of a station wagon that's about to die. Shannon's car finally breaks down after she rear-ends another driver, a guy who is a little cranky about it, but extremely gracious about her lack of car insurance and inability to pay for the damage she caused. She calls a tow truck, then seeks shelter from the frigid winter weather in this local establishment, going out of business. Sorry, that's Alexandria Books, which is going out of business, apparently, and looks to be the only business in the neighborhood that is still in business. For the moment. The bookstore is run by this guy who looks at Shannon and goes, "I know you." No, I don't. Sorry, force of habit. He introduces Shannon to his son, Jason, and then he introduces himself, Henry. Henry Janeway. Oh. Shannon explains that she's on her way to Florida and that her car broke down outside, and asks if she can wait for the tow truck here. Henry and Jason seem grateful for the company. They don't get many customers these days. The company that's building the Millennium Gate has bought out all the other local businesses. Henry is the last remaining holdout, and he's determined to stick it out as long as possible to stop them from building the gate, which he dismisses as a glorified shopping mall. Ancient history, the classical world, that's where it's at for Henry. He doesn't even have a computer. Shannon, however, does have a computer, and since she has to stick around until her car is repaired anyway, she talks her way into a job with Henry. If he'll pay her enough to cover the cost of fixing the car, she'll use her mastery of the latest cutting-edge email technology to help him with his campaign to block the construction of the Millennium Gate. That evening, Henry takes Shannon out for a beer at the local watering hole. He tells her that he's become an outcast in town. All the others have accepted the generous, above-market buyouts offered by the Millennium Gate Company, and they've all turned against him because his refusal to sell is threatening the project. Shannon says that she prefers the modern age to Henry's beloved classical era, and they have a little debate over which is better. Henry's like, "Classical age, best literature ever produced." Shannon's like, "Yeah, but we've got antibiotics." Henry says, "Families stuck together. No indoor plumbing. Shitting in a hole, just as good." "Yeah, but they had no phones, no lights, no motor cars, not a single luxury. Oh, and also slaves. Cleaner air." "Ooh, good point, but did I mention slavery?" She doesn't actually mention slavery in the episode. Instead, she gets Henry to concede that the modern era is better because it has cold beer. Probably because she cleverly deduced that Henry cares more about having access to the alcohol he likes than he does about the brutality and exploitation that was pervasive throughout the era of history he romanticizes. We got brutality and exploitation in the modern world you can ignore too, Henry. Join us in the now, man. Shannon and Henry are total opposites. She's a wanderer, an explorer. She loves to see new places. He's never left this town and has spent his life running a bookstore he inherited. Well, except for those few years when he changed his name and moved to Jasper, Missouri to buy the Double Deuce and banded together with some other area businessmen and a philosophical bouncer to murder a rich asshole, but that turned out to just be a phase. The guy in charge of the Millennium Gate project, this guy, Moss, just in from Fargo, makes an announcement that adds some more pressure to Henry. If the company can't break ground on the gate soon, by say, New Year's Day, they'll have to pull up stakes, leave Portage Creek, and go build their Millennium Gate somewhere else. Canton, Ohio, for instance. Henry is invigorated by this news, figuring that now all he has to do is hold out until New Year's, which is only days away at this point, and he can stop the gate and fuck over the entire town. He celebrates by inviting Shannon to a sad little private dinner in his bookstore, where they eat some bread and drink some wine in front of a book of French paintings that Henry stands open on the table. Henry refers to this as dining in Paris. Christ, he's like a character who would have learned to embrace life once again at the end of a very special episode of Punky Brewster, isn't he? Henry tells Shannon that her car has been fixed and is ready to go whenever she decides to leave, but he works the creepy old white guy charm on her and convinces her to stay a bit longer. Meanwhile, back in the 24th century, Janeway's story to Neelix about her big shot ancestor, Shannon O'Donnell, has got the rest of the ship interested in genealogy too. Janeway asks for Seven's help in researching more about Shannon's role in the construction of the Millennium Gate. Seven's like, why do you even care? This woman and you are separated by 15 generations. You've inherited only a small amount of her genetic material. Neelix and Seven find an old family photograph showing an elderly Shannon O'Donnell with her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Janeway's like, this is a good one, I'm framing this shit. She shows it to Seven like, a small amount of her genetic material, huh? Look at her, we could be twins. Back to Portage Creek, Indiana, December 2000, Moss approaches Shannon at the bar and says, so I know your backstory, want to hear it? She's like, sure. And Moss talks about how Shannon was an astronaut candidate, but she didn't quite make the cut. And then just recently, she lost her job as an aerospace engineer. But Moss has got the solution to her problems. He offers her a job working on the Millennium Gate project. All he asks in return is that she have a word with her new friend Henry Janeway and convince him to sell out so they can finally get this massive self-contained vertical biosphere, which they're calling a gate for some reason, built. The next morning, Shannon wakes up and walks downstairs into the bookstore, I guess they all live at the bookstore, and finds Jason on her laptop. He's like, sorry, I didn't think you'd mind. You've got some great games on this computer and the blankest browser history I've ever seen. Jason says to Shannon, do you have any kids? She's like, nah. Jason says, not a priority? And Shannon says, I wouldn't say that. I just never got around to it. So, not a priority. Henry walks in with a box of supplies for his bookstore with no customers and a picture window with going out of business painted on it in huge red letters, and Jason makes himself scarce so Shannon and Henry can start their argument right away. She's like, you know, the Millennium Gate is more than the glorified shopping mall you make it out to be. Yes, there's a commercial aspect to the project, but it's also about scientific research, learning things about our environment that we can use in the future to expand our civilization to new worlds. Plus, the food court has a Kenny Rogers Roasters. Now there's a brand that will endure in America through the next millennium. Surprisingly, Henry is not convinced by Shannon's sales pitch, and they have a fight, and Shannon takes her laptop and leaves. Jason leaves too, off to spend New Year's Eve with his aunt. Oh, it's New Year's Eve, by the way. Look, I'm not one to tell other people their business, but I really think Shannon took the wrong approach with Henry. I respect that she's not the sort of person to use her sexuality to get what she wants, but if she had made an exception in this case, Henry is a single father, a widower, who has barely left his decaying bookshop in years. I'm pretty sure for a kiss on the mouth and a hand job to completion, Shannon could have gotten Henry to do whatever she wanted him to do. Sign off on the Millennium Gate, sell his son into indentured servitude, whatever. We already know he's not bothered by slavery. Meanwhile, 400 years later, Captain Janeway is dismayed to learn that actually her ancestor Shannon O'Donnell wasn't such a big shot after all. After Tom Paris casts some doubt on how central Shannon was to the building of the Millennium Gate and the missions to Mars that resulted from it, Janeway does a bit more research and discovers the truth. Shannon O'Donnell trained to be an astronaut, but didn't make it, never worked on any Mars missions, and was merely a consultant on the Millennium Gate project, not the driving force. Oh yeah, and she didn't even have to overcome the opposition of the town to get the gate built. The entire town was enthusiastically in favor of it, except for one asshole named Henry Janeway, who she eventually married. Then, Chakotay, of all people, gets the best line of the episode, telling Captain Janeway to cut Shannon O'Donnell some slack. Don't be too hard on her. She may not have known she was supposed to live up to your expectations. Back in Portage Creek, before leaving town, Shannon bumps into Moss again, who tells her that since Henry is refusing to sell out, they'll just have to move the Millennium Gate to Canton, Ohio. But even though she failed to convince Henry to flip, Moss offers Shannon that job, giving her the card of an associate in Canton and promising to find a place for her. On her way to her car, Shannon bumps into Jason, who tells her that the cops have surrounded the bookstore. Shannon's like, why? And Jason says, because my dad's in there and he refuses to come out. So, just like every other day? Don't these people have something better to do on New Year's Eve? I'm out of here. Shannon is driving out of town, narrating into her tape recorder, talking about the last few days, how much she likes Henry, despite his pig-headedness, and Jason, despite the fact that he uses other people's laptops without permission. Then she takes a bite out of a gas station cookie and turns around and drives back to Portage Creek. Moss spots her standing behind the police tape and asks for her to be let through. She finds Henry in the bookstore with the lights off, walking around with a candle like the melodramatic old dork that he is. Shannon tells Henry that what he's doing isn't working, not for him, or for his son, or for the town. She tells him that she doesn't want to spend the rest of her life working in a bookstore, and yet she's also felt more at home here with Henry and Jason than she's felt anywhere else for a long time. That's why she came back. She got herself some gas station cookies for the drive, but when she tried one, it didn't taste good. Because all she could think about was Henry, and how much she wished he was there. Shannon's cookie-centric emotional plea pays off. Henry changes his mind. Says, well, I guess I could sell out and reopen my bookstore in the Millennium Gate Mall. Shannon's like, yes, great idea. There's definitely a bright future for bookstores and shopping malls. And Shannon and Henry leave the store, and the crowd of people who have gathered outside for absolutely no reason raise a cheer. Yay! The small-town bookstore proprietor has agreed to sell his family business to appease the gigantic corporation. This is what we wanted to happen, right? Back to Voyager, where Captain Janeway is moping in her quarters about her disappointing ancestor. I'm pretty sure you can find some brutal plantation overseers or murderous colonizers if you go back far enough. But yeah, go ahead and brood over the aerospace engineer who didn't quite make it as an astronaut. Neelix invites Janeway to the mess hall, where she finds the rest of the command crew assembled to celebrate Ancestors' Eve, a holiday Neelix just made up as an excuse to get drunk. It's too bad he didn't go back to Earth with the rest of them, because he would have fit in just fine. Janeway receives the framed family portrait of old lady Shannon O'Donnell as a gift, but at first she doesn't want it. She's like, nah. It turns out she only played a minimal role in destroying a town to build a gigantic artificial biosphere that presumably could have been built in another, less populated area if it didn't also, for some reason, incorporate retail space. So she's not my hero anymore. But 7 of 9 says she inspired you, and that's all that matters. Historical details are irrelevant. Oh, like Jesus. The Doctor gathers everyone together for their own family portrait, and as they take it, we zoom in close on the Shannon O'Donnell photograph, which is haunted and comes to terrifying life, forcing us to watch as old lady O'Donnell Janeway jealously clutches her grandchild close against her dying skeletal form, and that's the end! More so than any other Star Trek series, Voyager seems to have deeply bored the people who made it. On a consistent basis, year after year, but especially once it got into its latter half, the show gives off the impression that it is really of very little interest to its own creators. One reason I say this is how frequently those creators find excuses to make episodes of other shows. Usually it's not as disconnected from the status quo of the series as this one. It'll be an episode where they suddenly jump ahead 15 years or a few hundred years. Or it'll be an episode where most of the action takes place in a holodeck recreation of a 19th century Irish village. Something like that. Other Star Trek shows have done this sort of thing too, but Voyager does it a lot. Just sets the premise of the series aside for a week and does something else. It's not necessarily a bad thing. As always with me, it comes down to the execution of the thing itself. Never mind where and how 1159 fits in with Voyager as a series, is it a good episode on its own merits? Does it tell a story worth watching? Those are the important questions. And to those questions, my answer is, not really. The episode plays like the writers really wanted to tell a contemporary story loosely connected to their regular 24th century characters, and once they came up with a concept for that, they ran with it instead of thinking it through. So much about the Millennium Gate scenario feels muddled and underdeveloped, from the importance of Henry Janeway's refusal to sell out, to the romance between Henry and Shannon, to the Millennium Gate itself, and what it is, and why we should be glad it's being built if that's what we're supposed to be. Why is this one guy refusing to sell out such a big deal? And why does he need to sell out by midnight on New Year's Eve, or else he'll kill the entire project? Am I really supposed to believe that this massive corporation, which has already invested what seems like a lot of time and money into building this thing in Portage Creek, is just going to give up and move it to Canton, Ohio because this cranky middle-aged widower won't sell his bookstore? The episode tells us the entire town wants this project to happen, the citizens and the government. So am I supposed to believe they haven't just seized Henry's property through eminent domain? There's a glaring lack of clarity on details like this that make the entire situation play as false and contrived. Speaking of contrived and confused, seriously, what is the Millennium Gate supposed to be? It's a massive, self-contained artificial biosphere that's going to be used to conduct scientific research that will inform future missions to colonize alien worlds, but also, it's a mall? Is the mall just for the people who live in the biosphere? Will all the townspeople of Portage Creek be moving inside the biosphere? Or will they live outside the biosphere, but be able to enter it at will to go shopping? And speaking of confused, in this scenario, the corporation that's forcing the local small business owner to sell the bookstore his family has owned and operated for generations are the good guys? The episode stacks the deck in favor of the company building the Millennium Gate pretty shamelessly. The entire town, except Henry, supports it. The company has paid people 20% above market value for their properties. Moss offers Shannon a job, then reaffirms the offer even after she fails to persuade Henry to play ball. The parking lot putter-uppers paving paradise are the principal protagonists? Please! Perhaps I'm overly attached to the requirements of the dramatic formula here, but aren't we supposed to root for the underdog? Isn't that why that trope became a trope to begin with? Because our sympathies naturally, and in most real-life cases rightly, go to the little guy standing up to the big guy? I'm not saying it's impossible to tell a story that goes the opposite way, but this one is a little lopsided, don't you think? It plays like a retelling of David and Goliath produced by the Goliath estate. Yes, that generous and benevolent corporation wanted nothing more than to build their Millennium Gate for the good of the surrounding community and all humankind, but this mean old bookseller wouldn't let them. What the hell? Let's talk about that bookseller. Henry Janeway. He's a single parent, struggling to run a family-owned small business in the face of overwhelming community and corporate pressure to sell out, a man who feels alienated by modernity, who longs to lose himself in books, in tales of classical history and ancient long-gone civilizations, but that all sounds a little too romantic and likable, so to get us to side against him and root for him to sell out, they made him a sad, out-of-touch, stubborn dickhead. And oh yeah, he's also completely one-dimensional. For real, guy who likes the classics is his one and only character trait. He can't seem to start a conversation without making some ham-fisted reference to Zeus, or the Trojan War, or Dante's Inferno. How often does he think about the Roman Empire? Every fucking day. I get it. He's got one thing! Also, no disrespect to Kevin Teige, a fine actor whose work I have enjoyed in a wide variety of TV shows and films over the years, but mostly Roadhouse, but he's not who I would think of if I was casting the role of an older guy who is headstrong yet so irresistibly charming that he gets the woman who randomly wanders into his place on her way through town to fall in love and decide to stay with him over the course of a few days. There's no hint of romantic or sexual spark between Teige and Kate Mulgrew, which leaves Henry and Shannon feeling like exactly what they are. Two characters who get together because the script says they do. Oh yeah, and why is it such a big deal that Henry won't come out of the bookstore at the end? This is back to more of a plot thing than a Henry's character thing, but the cops are there? They've erected barricades? There's a crowd gathered? Why? Did Henry take hostages? Did Henry threaten to blow his brains out or burn the place down? Doesn't seem like it. Jason says Dad's in the bookstore and he won't come out. Okay. So? If he doesn't come out and agree to sell out by midnight, we've been led to believe the Millennium Gate company will just leave town and go build their thing somewhere else. It's not like they're gonna bulldoze Henry's store with him in it. Where's the tension supposed to be coming from here? On that subject, where's the tension supposed to be coming from in the relationship between Shannon and Henry? As soon as we learn that Henry's last name is Janeway, which happens in his very first scene, it's obvious how this is all going to end up. That wouldn't be a concern if this was a better told story. A lot of these seemingly nitpicky little complaints I'm making wouldn't be a concern if this was a better told story, because I'd be too busy enjoying the story and being swept up in what's going on with the characters to notice or worry about this nitpicky little shit. But this isn't a well-told story about compelling characters. It's manufactured drama. Poorly manufactured drama, and nothing more. As far as the characters besides Shannon and Henry go, the always excellent John Carroll Lynch is, well, excellent as Moss, the, God help us, trustworthy, well-intentioned, and not at all predatory corporate guy. And as Henry's son Jason, Bradley Pierce is present. Again, no disrespect to the actor. He does what he can with the character of Jason, who only exists to give Shannon someone other than Henry to theoretically bond with, even though they don't seem that close either. Now, as is usually the case, not everything here is bad. As resistant as I am to the way the show portrays the company that wants to demolish a small town in order to build its vertical biodome and outlet mall as the good guys, the episode also makes a well-observed point about how eager we are to mythologize history, especially history we feel personally connected to, and how reluctant we can be to accept facts that contradict that mythology. And yet the episode makes room for the role of mythology as well. History, accurate, factual history, is crucial, but if we draw some inspiration or learn important lessons from the legend, that's okay too. There's also something about the writing of this one that I find appealing, even though I wouldn't go so far as to call it good. The writing of the episode has a sentimental quality reminiscent of the live anthology series that dominated the golden age of television and launched the careers of a generation of legendary screenwriters, including Rod Serling, Reginald Rose, and Paddy Chayefsky. The scene between Shannon and Henry after she comes back, when she tells him that she turned the car around after biting into a chocolate chip cookie because it didn't taste good, and all she could think about was how much she missed him, is exactly the sort of cornball tripe I'd expect to see in a kinescope of an episode of Playhouse 90 from 1957, and I mean that as a compliment. I love that shit. This episode was written by Joe Menosky from a story by Brannon Braga and Menosky, and was directed by David Livingston, most prolific director in Star Trek history. Among many others, he also directed the Deep Space Nine episode, The Storyteller, which I just reviewed in the previous video of this series. The fact that the events of 1159 have nothing to do with the rest of the series doesn't bother me, because the events of most Voyager episodes have nothing to do with the rest of the series either. If anything, I admire the willingness of the writers to say, to hell with this Star Trek shit, we're going to do an episode of Studio One this week. I just wish they'd come up with something better, because this one is as underwhelming as a gas station cookie. Those are my thoughts on 1159. What do you think of this episode? Please share your thoughts with me in the comments. If you'd like to support this channel, and I sure wish you would if you can afford it, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or by making a one-time gift by clicking the thanks button, or via PayPal or Venmo. Links are in the description. Please join me next time as this grab bag batch of reviews concludes. One last episode drawn from the grab bag. Until the next time I do a grab bag batch, whenever that is. Star Trek Enterprise is up. No surprise there. And the randomly selected episode of Enterprise I'll be reviewing is from the 3rd season of that series. It's called Exile. See you next time for that one. Thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.